Welcome back to Between Sessions, a weekly breakdown of the news, rumors, and racing stories shaping Formula One. My name is Devyani, and this week, Formula One came to a decision about the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. While on track in China, Mercedes had a massive weekend, with Kimi Antonelli becoming the youngest pole sitter in F1 history and backing it up with a race win, as George Russell and both Ferraris kept things interesting right behind him. Let's get into the newsstand. Formula One announced that the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix will not take place in April due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, and that will include F1, F2, F3, and F1 Academy. Now, let me be clear, in this instance, I really don't care about Formula One. There's real people in harm's way, in danger, and that is paramount. Yes, they've left the wording open that, they won't take place in April, so maybe they could be rescheduled. Just logistically, with how the calendar works, I don't see that happening. And with the 22 races we already have, they're fulfilling all their contracts, most of their TV buyouts. There's no need to reschedule things. And with how the hosting fees work, it would be at a loss financially for many of the teams and Formula One to even do another race. There were considerations for a doubleheader at Suzuka, but it doesn't really make sense. Second, in the newsstand, we have Flavio Briatore confirming that Alpine are in discussions with Mercedes to acquire that Otro Capital stake of, I think, 23% that has all the athletes as one, combined entity right now. And we heard, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that it was Christian Horner and a group of investors also looking to buy that share to, crawl and make his way back into Formula One. So we'll see what happens there. And number 3, the FIA has said that they're not going to be making any changes after the Chinese Grand Prix to the rules. They had scheduled this post-Shanghai review for all the team principals to see if there needed to be any changes, as there was a lot of uncertainty regarding the new rules and regulations. And the idea was that if Melbourne and Shanghai were absolute disasters, they could kind of make some tweaks and fast track them to Suzuka. But they've decided that now they're not going to make any changes until or after the Miami Grand Prix. Okay, let's get into the Chinese Grand Prix, which was quite the weekend. And I want to start on Thursday on Media Day with George Russell and his many pull quotes that he was putting out there. And one of them was the calling Ferrari selfish thing in regard to not wanting to change the rules for the starting procedures. And there's a lot of discussion about the per lap harvest limit in regards to the start and how essentially every lap there is a harvest limit for the cars. And because of how racetracks are designed, the front half of the grid that's starting, they are beyond the line for harvesting. So all the, revving and everything they're doing on the start procedures is counting for that first lap. So there's an idea to get rid of that per lap harvest limit, at least for the beginning, to make the starting procedure more easy. Now, let me read out George Russell's exact words, because I don't want to mischaracterize what he was saying. Essentially, he says, "Unfortunately, sometimes when you're trying to make changes for the good of the sport, if a team has a competitive edge, like Ferrari at the moment with the race starts, they wouldn't wish to see anything changing. I think half the grid got caught out by a quirk in the rules for the race start in Melbourne. We now know that, but because there was some resistance from some teams to change, we're just going to have to work around it. The FIA was looking to potentially adjust the start procedure, but as you can imagine, some teams who were making good starts didn't want it, which I think is just a little bit silly. I'm not overly concerned, but it's definitely a challenge. They could do. I think they want to, but they need a supermajority from the teams, which they don't have, and you can probably guess which team is against that," referring to Ferrari, of course. "I don't think their gain is coming from this issue. Now all the teams know the problem. We'll just drive around it, but it's creating a bit of unnecessary complication to something that doesn't really need to be there. Half the grid messed up in Melbourne. We'll adjust. We know what we need to do and be wary of now. The FIA did want to just make our life easier and just remove this harvest limit, but as often happens, people have selfish views and they just want to do what's best for themselves. And that's part of Formula One and part of the challenge of Formula One. We'll deal with it, and I think the starts here will be much better." Now, here's the thing. I know George Russell got his lashings for that statement in regards to the Mercedes compression ratio engine and all the things. I cannot bring myself to hate on George Russell. I relate to him too much. He's very dear to me. And he's one of those people that, while I'm not always rooting for him on track to win things, I relate to him a lot. And here's the thing. he's right. It is selfish for a Ferrari not to want to change this rule. But also, that's kind of the point. That's kind of the whole thing we're doing here with sports in this way. Of course, it's up to the FIA and Formula One to make sure the spirit of the rules are kind of being honored. But at the same time, it's all about the loopholes. And to Ferrari's credit, Fred Vasseur brought this up like last year, maybe even more than that at this point. He brought it up in one of those F1 like commission meetings where they were talking about the 2026 regulations, and he was shot down. So he said, okay, we'll design a smaller turbo to combat this issue and we'll figure out the starts that way. It's not exactly Ferrari's fault that everybody else didn't do that. Let's get into free practice one. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli were leading in free practice one. It was relatively uneventful. Franco Colapinto had a spin early on. There was a little bit of almost battling between Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton, which is not something you always expect to see in free practice, but I think they made contact, and then Lewis, unrelated to that, had a spin of his own. The thing I noticed in the free practice kind of idea was the Ferrari garage playing the Macarena very loudly. Now, Charles Leclerc and other Ferrari drivers in the past have spoken about how loudly Red Bull plays their music, like throughout the weekend, how they can hear it, and how sometimes it can be distracting, whatever. And it looks like Ferrari is, answering back now with their Macarena wing that they brought to China. Although they only used it in FP1, they rushed the Macarena, the rotating wing, to China and then didn't use it in competitive sessions, which is strange to me, but maybe it's just not ready and they want to give it time. This was the first of Arvid Lindblad's many stoppages. It just wasn't a very clean weekend for Arvid Lindblad in China, and the fact that it's his first time driving there also makes it harder. So all these stoppages, I mean, he ended up not finishing free practice one, so he didn't get that much time to familiarize himself with the circuit in person. And obviously the rest of the weekend kind of followed suit with this. Also on Friday, we had sprint qualifying, and we had George Russell on pole, Kimi Antonelli P2, Lando Norris P3. And that P3 was a pretty good finishing for McLaren, who for the most part had felt the Ferraris were quicker than them this whole weekend, but at least in sprint qualifying, Lando Norris got ahead. Max Verstappen just didn't have that great of a day, or honestly a weekend, to be fair. He was really trying, but at the end of sprint qualifying, Laurent Mekies was apologizing to Max Verstappen on the radio. I think in the end, Max was 1.7, 1.8 seconds off of George Russell on pole, which is a big gap, something that we don't usually see from Max. And then Isaac Hadjar had a deployment issue in Q3, which ended him in, I think, P10, but obviously, he also didn't have the cleanest of weekends. However, a lot of his quali times being close enough to Max Verstappen is kind of his benchmark. Obviously, the Red Bull is not what it was last year or anywhere near to what it was in 2023 or 2024, but the aim of the second Red Bull seat and the driver in it has always been to be as close to Max Verstappen as possible, and that has also been what Isaac is saying to the media is his goal. Regardless of the car's performance, the goal for him is to be as close as possible to Max Verstappen, if not to beat him, and thus far, he's doing a pretty good job of that. There was a little bit of a moment between Max Verstappen and Pierre Gasly in sprint qualifying where it looked like Pierre might have impeded Max, but that incident did go to the stewards. However, Max Verstappen basically said, Pierre got in the way of his preferred line, but it wasn't impeding, it was fine, and basically it was this is not penalty level. And thus far this weekend and in Australia, it seems like that best of the rest title in terms of the top teams is going to be between Alpine and Haas, although they have the opportunity to capitalize when teams like Red Bull and McLaren are unable or have reliability issues or just aren't fast enough or whatever the case might be. Williams, again, pure backmarker now. Williams, Cadillac, Aston Martin are definitely backmarkers. Haas and Alpine are, midfielders, and then it's kind of unclear where Audi are at this point in time, but we'll figure that out in due course. For the sprint, George Russell started from pole with Kimi Antonelli right next to him. Lewis Hamilton and Charles both had great starts. Lewis took the lead from George Russell, and he and George were doing some very entertaining battling in the opening laps, but eventually it settled, and George Russell passed Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis got passed by his own teammate. things seemed to settle, and then we had the safety car because I think Nico Hulkenberg stopped on track, and George had built up a gap of about, I think, 5 seconds, which obviously he lost in the safety car. And most of the top teams did, in fact, pit. And I think Lewis Hamilton lost a little bit of time because he was behind Charles Leclerc at that time, and they did double stack. However, I'm not sure that him staying out would have been the correct thing. Kimi Antonelli had a pretty abysmal race start. I mean, he went from 2nd to 7th place quite quickly, and then he had a little incident with Isaac Hadjar where he hit Isaac Hadjar and then got a 10-second penalty. So when he came in under the safety car to pit, he had to serve, or he did serve, that 10-second penalty. There was some discussion about whether it would have been better for him to, just keep going and then serve it at the end. But again, I don't think it would have made that much difference, especially it was a sprint, so I think that was the right call. And then after the safety car, there was an incident where he was going wide as the safety car went back in, and Oscar Piastri behind him. Because Kimi Antonelli went wide, Oscar overtook him, but then he had to give the place back. It was a very strange occurrence because I don't think Oscar necessarily meant to overtake him, but Kimi left the track and rejoined, and then Oscar overtook Ollie Behrman in front of him. Luckily, that he was able to give the place back. It was all sorted out, but that wasn't well. I did realize that I've been saying that Oscar Piastri hasn't completed any race laps at all because obviously he didn't start in Australia and he didn't start the race in China, but I kind of forget the sprint exists. Although I will say this is a big jump in terms of sprint races, and I am acknowledging the battery battles and how it's all about management and these overtakes aren't real and they're artificial and yada, 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 which I have a bone to pick with that because, when were we seeing real racing? I've been watching the sport for about 7-8 years now, so even the racing that I knew when I first became a fan was artificial. It was DRS, we all know a DRS train, so I struggle to really be like, well, this is fake racing. I think there's something to be said about how you can't really push the limit in a qualifying lap because you're focused on, conserving energy, or how these corners that are formative to Formula One that show a driver's bravery and, big balls of James Hunt and all that, whether it's the S's at Suzuka or Puhan in Spa, and how those corners, which used to show bravery and skill and finesse, are now used for energy recovery. I understand that aspect of it and the style of driving and how it's not philosophically traditional racing, but the overtakes and the battles itself, I'm kind of that's almost a good outcome of these regulations. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, where were we? The sprint race. So in the end, George Russell won, which again was not surprising to anyone involved. Oh, speaking of Kimi Antonelli and Isaac Hadjar, they had a moment afterwards. Basically, Kimi went to go apologize to Isaac while Isaac was still in the car, and he kind of waved him away. And there was a lot of discourse on social media about how Kimi needs to learn to give Isaac space, and Isaac Hadjar's unprofessional. Toto Wolff said that Isaac Hadjar was unprofessional, and to me, I'm nobody was really wrong in this scenario. There's nothing wrong done. Kimi Antonelli recognized that he made a mistake, that he kind of messed with Isaac Hadjar's race, and he wanted to go apologize, take responsibility, show accountability, and apologize. But also, Isaac Hadjar is not obligated to accept that apology, I understand why Kimi was going to him. He wanted to express that, but Isaac Hadjar is under no, he doesn't have to say, oh yeah, no worries, Kimi, it's all good, don't worry about it. He doesn't have to do that. He might be worried about it, it's a high pressure situation. He's at Red Bull trying to prove his worth, trying to show the big guys there that he deserves to be there. And this, Kimi Antonelli, who has a much more, cushiony is the wrong word, but I guess a more supportive environment from, although Red Bull is different than it was under Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, but there is a vibe difference between Red Bull and Mercedes, and we know how the second Red Bull driver can be treated at times if they're not performing to the standard at which it is believed they should be, aka the standard of Max Verstappen, So I just don't blame anyone in that situation. No one did anything wrong. And the next day, people asked about it, and it was obviously super overanalyzed by everybody because F1, the official account, posted both perspectives of it, Isaac's on board and Kimi. Anyway, so there was a lot of discussion, and the next day, Kimi was basically after the race, he was yeah, I spoke to Isaac during the driver's parade. It's totally fine. you know how he is. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, you feel things, and that's totally fine. And there's definitely discussion to be had about Kimi and Antonelli ruining the races of others, whether it's Max Verstappen last year or Charles Leclerc, or I can't think of any others right now, but there might be a couple. And a lot of the parallels made to Max Verstappen in his early days, and this kind of like, he's really young, he's super, super fast, but he has to get it under control. He has to like control himself. We'll discuss that more, but that's the sprint race. Oh, and the other fun part of this was the Ferrari. Seeing Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton battle, genuinely, this is what Formula One, the best of Formula One to me is teammates battling, because they have equal machinery. That's the most on par two cars will be. And so to see them battle, you're seeing a real use of skill. And obviously now, yes, there's a lot about battery and management, energy recovery and overtake mode and boost mode, but that is the most pure racing you can see, because there's no difference in the car, or at least there shouldn't be. And obviously they were fighting. It was great. I thought it was great. At one point, Charles came on the radio and said, like, does he know how, what did he say? Does he know how much space these cars take up, or how wide these cars are, something. And again, I'm kind of like, I take everything the drivers say on the radio and immediately after with a huge grain of salt, just because of like how much adrenaline is coursing through their veins. They're going so fast. There's a lot happening. Like I try not to read too much into it, even if they're being overly sassy. Like I'm just kind of like, okay, it is what it is. And the overtake he was referring to, where he says that Lewis kind of pushed him off a little bit, I think Lewis gave him enough room, but watching his onboards, I kind of like just how the cars are. I kind of see from your perspective in the car why you might think you got pushed out, but then when you look at the actual footage, you're like, okay, that's fine, you know? But most of all, I'm happy that Ferrari let them fight in the sprint race and in the feature race, because especially when you watch Sky Sports F1, sometimes they immediately advocate for team orders, like immediately. And again, I am a firm team orders hater. I understand why they do it. I understand the value, I understand the merit that you can ruin both drivers' races if you are battling each other and you're giving the person behind both of you the option. Like, I understand why they do it. I just hate it. I love seeing teammates fight, and you don't get to see it that much in Formula One because the teams, you know, nip that shit in the bud. So I'm happy we got to see it. I'm happy Fred let them fight. And until you really have, you know, them taking each other out or being super aggressive, I say let them fight. And after their sprint race, it was time for qualifying. Now, George Russell had a bit of an issue in Q3. Now, basically it was a gearbox issue. He went out and immediately was like, something's wrong with the car, something's not working. And Marcus Dudley was like, everything's all right. And George was like, everything is not all right. Like, something is wrong. And he goes back in, and that's pretty early on. It looks like they're fixing his car. Meanwhile, Kimi Antonelli, pretty chill, pretty in control of the whole session, you know? And that was just super fun to see, because the whole point of when you have a dominant team, your number two driver per se, they don't have to win all the time. It's like, it's not like anybody is expecting Kimi Antonelli to beat George Russell, or like how nobody's expecting Max's teammate to beat Max. But in case something happens, in case they have an issue or they have a crash or they have an incident, that second guy needs to be able to take their place, to be right there, you know, to not just capitalize, but make sure they get all the points they can for their team. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk about how Kimi Antonelli performs under pressure, if he's too young, if he's mature enough, if he's got his head on straight, blah, 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 blah. But he had this qualifying session in pretty good under control. Like, his first lap in Q3 was good, but then he improved upon his own time, you know? Even though George Russell, they fixed the car, it was great. He came out. It might not have been the perfect setup or anything, but he was able to put a lap on the board that kept him in P2, which is very important. Like, that is paramount, you know, that is really important. And Mercedes, illegal or not, they're doing what they have to do. I do think it's funny that in the aftermath, George Russell was like, yeah, I was screaming like Kimi Räikkönen to get me a new steering wheel. And also Bradley Lord, the communications director, manager, what's his title? Yeah, Bradley Lord basically was being interviewed, and he was like, oh yeah, it's the world's oldest solution is just have to turn it off and turn it on again, and then that didn't work, so we did that again. Like, this is the most unserious sport. You're telling me that these like bajillion-dollar cars have a problem, and Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team is like, how about we just try turning it off? Maybe that will work. Maybe we'll reset it. Like, that's me with my laptop. You're telling me they employed the same strategies with a gazillion-dollar car? In the end, for qualifying, Kimi was on pole, George Russell P2, Lewis Hamilton P3, Charles Leclerc P4, and then McLarens were the third row. After that, I think it was Pierre Gasly who beat out Max Verstappen in qualifying. So then it's Pierre, Max, and then Isaac and Oliver Behrman. And Isaac Hadjar said after qualifying, when talking about Max Verstappen, he said, that's the only thing I look at. What they do up front, they're just having fun amongst themselves. The best driver on the grid, he's right next to me. And being that close to him in every session, I think that's not bad. Like I said, that's the exact goalpost to set for yourself. I did laugh my ass off when Lewis Hamilton was in that press conference talking about party mode. He was talking about how I've been with Mercedes a long time, and I know that they have a party mode. They have another mode that they're able to go to in qualifying, and in Q2 they switch that on, and like, we don't have that, which I think is the funniest thing ever, because the whole time at Mercedes he was like, there's no party mode. We have no party mode. Everybody has a party mode. There's no party mode. And now he's like, we had a party mode. And obviously we knew they had it the whole time, but it's just funny that now, like, it was very hard for me to conceptualize a Formula One universe without Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. That's kind of one of the corners, like, just by the timing of when I came into Formula One, like, Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes was like, that is Formula One. Like, that's the partnership that I was pretty far removed from Lewis at McLaren. So it didn't really, like, that's not how I saw Formula One, So it's so strange for, like, Toto Wolff considers Lewis Hamilton one of his drivers. Like, when he saw the qualifying, he was like, oh yeah, a Mercedes 1, 2, 3. Like, come on. Now we get to the race. And imagine my surprise when I'm just watching the pre-show, waiting for the grid walk, and I see that, Lando Norris he's not doing the reconnaissance lap? What's going on here? Then Oscar Piastri is wheeled back into the garage. And then Alex Albon was supposed to start from the pit lane, but he doesn't. Gabriel Bortoletto's not sitting in his car for the race start. We're starting race 2 of the season, and 4 cars out of 22 aren't even starting the race. Okay. And then midway through the race, Max Verstappen is told to retire. He hasn't been having that great of a time anyway, but he's told to retire. Both Aston Martins end up retiring. And just like that, that's 7 cars we don't have. Only 15 cars finished this race. Like, that's pretty crazy. And because towards the end of last year, the cars and their reliability were basically at an all-time high. You didn't see a lot of reliability issues unless you were, Lando Norris and Zandvoort. But it was pretty abnormal for that to happen. And today to see so many was like, again, we're in a different world of Formula One. Lewis Hamilton took the lead at the start, and after things settled a bit, the order was Lewis Hamilton in P1, Kimi Antonelli P2, Charles Leclerc P3, George Russell P4. On that opening lap, we had Isaac Hadjar and Ollie Behrman fighting, and then Isaac Hadjar spinning and Ollie Behrman having to evade that, which very well to do, but he still lost quite a few places. Isaac Hadjar lost quite a few places, and it didn't seem like things were going to be going their way this race. But also, by lap 3, I think Kimi Antonelli got in front of Lewis Hamilton, and at the same time, or similar time, George Russell got in front of Charles Leclerc, then George Russell passed Lewis Hamilton, and then it kind of felt like, Kimi was just out in the distance a little bit. And then we had the Ferraris fighting, and again, I had so much fun. I had a terrific time. I know Fred Vasseur probably was a little bit stressed. The Ferrari pit wall was probably a little bit stressed. But I, as a fan, time of my life. And I was so scared that one of them was going to whine about team orders, or the pit wall was going to be like, be careful. I was like, please don't do any, Scuderia rules. Like, I don't want to see any Cavallino Rampante rules. Let them race. Trust your drivers. Obviously, if they crash into each other once, then I understand restricting them, sure. But this is Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. They're not complete idiots. Track, and a safety car comes out. Now, this is when things could get kind of messy. Except they don't, because most of the people pit, as they should. Colapinto and Ocon stay out because they are on hards. A lot of the other people are on mediums, and they switch to hards, I think. So after everyone comes out, it's Kimi Antonelli, Franco Colapinto, Esteban Ocon, and then the rest of the front runners, which is, again, not something you expect to see at 3 a.m. Eventually, we get to see Lewis Hamilton and Kimi Antonelli battling, and when I tell you, again, seeing a 41-year-old 7-time world champion battling with this 19-year-old second-year driver who, like, is committing credit card fraud on his trainer and playing pranks on his race engineer is not exactly what you expect to see, but it really does give retail job. Like, every 19-year-old has, like, a 41-year-old friend at their retail job. And that's what it was channeling to me. But they had a great battle. Kimi Antonelli is able to stay in front, and I think that battle does hinder Lewis Hamilton a little bit in the future just because of, battery, tires, all the things, right? Around lap 27, I think that's when Arvid Lindblad spins in turn 14, and then later on we have the Esteban Ocon, unfortunately, coming into contact with Franco Colapinto, who's just coming out of the pits. I will say Esteban shouldn't even have been there. He had a really long pit stop because of Haas. It was like 6 seconds, but had that not happened, he wouldn't even have been there. Anyway, he immediately takes responsibility. He gets a 10-second penalty. Franco's race is he did damage, but he ends up coming back to P10. And after a while, Kimi Antonelli is kind of just off in the distance, like 8-9 seconds ahead of everyone else. He does have a little bit of a wobble, a little bit of a scare towards the end, but eventually he brings it home and he wins his first race ever. And when I tell you it was quite emotional, this is a kid that I've been watching, compete out of single-seater racing since, 2022 was Italian and German F4. I watched those seasons. I watched him compete in Freca in 2023. I watched him in F2 in 2024. And I watched through, and I remember Italian F4 being like, okay, this kid has got something special. Like, for sure, he's special. And then watching in Freca, I was like, put him in an F1 car now. Put this 16-year-old in the F1 car right now. Because I think a lot of times there's been struggle with, qualifying and overtaking, but when he has that clean air, it's whoosh, he's gone. And watching him, he has a pretty instinctual driving style, very much from the gut. And it's one of those things that Toto says all the time where it's like, he is rapid, he is quick. And it's much easier to slow them down, calm them down, make them think, make them more strategic than get them to be faster. So I'm excited to see how he progresses, how he grows. And I know last year there was since Monza 2024 where he crashed Georgia's Mercedes in free practice. And then last year, he had all these incidents that were kind of damaging his confidence. He had that pretty awful summer spell. I think getting his first podium and now getting his first win and pole, he's checking off all these boxes, and maybe he's not ready to be in full world championship competition with George Russell, although never say never. Maybe he's not completely ready for that yet, but ticking off these boxes, okay, he's in a top car and needs to make it happen, relieves the pressure off of him. And I think that's important because now he knows he can do it. The first win is the hardest. After that, it's circumstance and qualifying and strategy, but getting that first win, until you get it seems almost impossible, although obviously has gotten it much quicker than other drivers. He only had to wait a year, whereas George Russell, Lando Norris, they waited a lot longer for their first wins. But the podium was very wholesome. I think having Kimi, George, and Lewis was kind of a full circle moment, with Lewis being reunited with his Merc family once again, and Toto Wolff knew exactly what he was doing by sending Peter Bonington up on that podium. I will say, though, I slightly cringed at Toto Wolff's radio message to Kimi, where he was repeating all the stuff people, like the slander people had said about Kimi, like, oh, he's too young to be put in a Mercedes, he's, not ready, put him in and I was like, do you really need to tell him how much everyone thought he was a bum? Like, is that really necessary right now? But it felt like he had rehearsed it too. Anyway, not the point. It was very wholesome. I loved how much it clearly meant to Kimi, and how he was, tearing up when he was doing his interviews in the aftermath. And it was nice to see that display of emotion. It was nice to see how happy, George and Lewis were for him. And even on the podium, this man is pretending to hug Bono so he can dump champagne on him, So he's still a 19-year-old kid. The Franco Colapinto and Esteban Ocon thing kind of took on a life of its own. I think it was around lap 33 on this race. Franco had just pit. Esteban Ocon had pit, I think, 3 laps earlier. And basically it's at turn 2, and Esteban Ocon kind of sees a gap, and you kind of understand where he thinks he's going to get the gap, but he makes a move and he instantly, makes contact. They both spin kind of in synchronized fashion. And Esteban immediately on the radio he takes responsibility, and he says that was my fault, and he is given a penalty for it, the 10-second penalty. And obviously Franco Colapinto, like, just because somebody gets a penalty, just because they get the correct punishment doesn't mean that the other person's race automatically gets fixed. But he took responsibility also in the media afterwards on his post about the Chinese Grand Prix. Like, it was very clear that he was apologetic, that he was sorry that he had messed with Franco's race, that he was happy that Franco had ended up coming back to P10 and scoring his first point in Formula 1. Like, that's very good. But still, Esteban Ocon's social media were flooded with some of the most, like, awful. And I know that all the drivers get, hate and abuse online, but it was pretty bad. And Franco Colapinto's, management company even put out a statement, or tweeted out, don't do this. Their statement said, public service announcement, please do not send hate or death threats to Esteban, his family, or the Haas F1 team. It won't undo a crash. It only reflects poorly on Franco's fandom. Thank you so much for keeping the support positive and respectful. Y'all, that's not good. On his Instagram post, Esteban, and I quote, said, "First of all, very sorry to Franco. I take full responsibility for that one, and I'm happy he managed to score points as he drove a great race." Clearly apologetic. And Colapinto was also like, "Thank you, mate. Thank you for the apology." And in the media afterwards, he was saying, I'm pissed, but not at Esteban. He came and found me immediately and apologized. Franco actually seemed to be more annoyed at the timing of the safety car. When Lance Stroll stopped on track, and Franco was kind of like, why did they need to send out a safety car when one car stopped on track? It feels like every time I'm about to do something good, what did he say exactly? Hold on. He said, "I'm angry about that. I had a good start and passed many cars, but because one car stopped, they brought out the safety car, which didn't make any sense to me. That's what frustrates me the most. Every time I'm about to do something good, something stops me," which sucks. But at least he scored his first point. I will say the picture that Alpine posted to show that he scored his first points, I was like, your audience, the target audience, his fans. That's what they want to see. I don't think this victory means that Kimi Antonelli is necessarily the next Max Verstappen. I don't think they're comparable personalities in that way, except for the fact that they're considered child prodigies, and they were scouted by teams very early, and they both skipped a formative, series on the way to Formula 1, with Kimi skipping F3 and Max skipping F2. It's very clear. And obviously Toto Wolff's fervor for getting Kimi Antonelli in this seat is because he lost out on Max Verstappen. And if we remember, going into 2015, both Mercedes and Red Bull had expressed interest in Max Verstappen, and Max's dad, Jos, was very deliberate on not signing him too early to a junior academy, and because he wanted the most options for Max, because he knew people would want him and that he would be hot commodity. Seems wrong. It kind of seems dehumanizing, but that was the case. That was kind of the case. And Toto really wanted Max, but their plan for Max included him doing F2, him then, probably driving at Williams, and then eventually when Nico Rosberg or Lewis Hamilton's contract ran out or whatever, he would take his place. That was kind of the plan. Kind of like what George Russell did, basically. But Max Verstappen, they wanted Max in a seat, and that's what Red Bull could offer because they had Toro Rosso, they had a junior team, and Max could immediately jump in that seat, and that's what ended up happening. With Kimi Antonelli, Toto Wolff has been he has my full support from day one. From the second that he announced that Kimi Antonelli would be taking Lewis Hamilton's seat, he was like, this kid, we're gonna nurture him. And the thing is that Kimi has been with Mercedes since he was 11. He got scouted when he was very young, like 2014. I think he went to this camp, this motorsport summer camp where Giovanni Minardi, yes, those Minardis, he saw Kimi drive, and he immediately called up Marco Antonelli, Kimi's dad, and was like, yo, I'm sending you a contract because your son has it. And that started the journey, and Kimi has all these prodigal stories about how he tested F4 cars when he was 11 and within 4 laps was faster than the drivers in the series, yada, yada, yada. And eventually Giovanni Minardi goes to Toto Wolff, I think it's 2017 in Monza, and he's like, I have this kid. You need to take a look. And Toto's like, okay, if a Minardi is telling me this, then you take it seriously. And by Monaco 2018, Kimi Antonelli is a Mercedes driver. Okay. And he's 11. And he goes to meet Toto and the team for the first time. He's learning German. He is a Mercedes kid through and through. Probably one of, not the youngest, but even George and Esteban were older when they came into the throes of Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli was a baby and a Mercedes driver. That's been his thing. And at points it's been to the detriment of other drivers in the Mercedes driver development program, whether it's a Fred Vesti, whether it's a Paul Aron, because I think it's always been known that this seat, this next iteration from Mercedes after Lewis Hamilton was going to be Kimi Antonelli, and that's been known for a while now. Max Verstappen, he really put the screws to his hatred for these new regulations. He said, it's terrible. If someone likes this, then you really don't know what racing is. Not fun at all. Playing Mario Kart. This is not racing. Boosting past, and then you run out of battery, and then the next straight, they boost past you again. For me, it's a joke. Well, it's just Kimi or George winning, right? It's not really back and forth. They're miles ahead of the field. It's just that Ferrari sometimes has these good starts, and they push themselves in front, and then it takes a few laps to sort it all out. But like I said, this has nothing to do with racing. I would say the same if I would be winning races, because I care about the racing product. It's not about being upset with where I am. Now, I do think that as we continue through the season, if we keep seeing the same Ferraris make a great start and then the Mercedes overtaking them again, then things settle down, it will get boring. But right now, this is an improvement to last year in terms of just how they're able to follow the cars, and how there's but there's still trains. It's not like everyone's able to overtake. There is a lot of battery back and forth, and I think right now we're so enthralled with how entertaining these races are that eventually, as we get more familiar with these regulations, we'll see that it's not all that entertaining. But for right now, I'm reveling in it. For right now, I'm having a great time. Also because it's something different. Also because it's different drivers at the front than were last year. It's not Max and Lando and Oscar, And I think that novelty is also what's making it more exciting right now. And obviously, as fans, typically, you're going to enjoy regulations that your driver is excelling at more. And that's fair. You're not obligated to be this completely unbiased person. At the same time, you can recognize that these regulations will have problems. Right now, they're still exciting, and if this continues, they will continue to be exciting. Maybe we can sort out the qualifying side of things, and it's really the battery. I think the aero and the chassis side of things might be okay, but it's really the battery part of, the 50-50 split that's my issue. But again, fixing that is not as simple as it sounds. Now onto the scroll stop, things that made me stop scrolling. Number one, there's a video of George Russell, his partner Carmen, in the car, and they are handed these essentially fan works, fan artwork. And one of my favorite things about the races in China are the different like fan clubs for each driver and how many of them have their own nicknames. Like George Russell is sometimes called the Emperor, and I think it started out as like a slander name, like as an insult, but it's been reclaimed by Team GR in China. And there was like, it was like a almost like a bookmark like artwork thing, and it said the savior of Mercedes. Which I love the theatrics. I love the drama. I think Lando Norris's nickname is Evil Frog because his helmet, the neon one, I think, looks like a poisonous frog. And when I say Evil Frog is probably the funniest nickname that could be. Like, AI couldn't write Evil Frog as a nickname for Lando Norris if it tried. If it had a millennia. No, that's not true. It probably could. Genius. You're a genius. The other thing that made me stop scrolling was Yannick Sinner, who won at Indian Wells today. Like, this man is making history as the youngest man to have won on every hard court, right? Like, major hard court. And he's talking about watching the race at night. He's talking about it's a big day for Italy because Kimi Antonelli, and he's writing Grande Kimi on the camera that he found. You know what I forgot about? Kimi Antonelli being announced as Kimi Räikkönen on the podium. I thought I was hallucinating at 4 a.m. or whenever it was, because I was like, maybe I am too tired, because there's no way this man just said Kimi Räikkönen. Like, now Kimi has to win again so they can say his name properly. And I also was very pleased because I got to hear the Italian and German anthems in succession, and the last time we got to hear that was at Singapore 2019 for Sebastian Vettel, my favorite of all time. And I missed it. I missed even if it's flipped, I appreciate the combination, and it was fun. Okay, I think that's all I had in terms of the race. But it's time for the F1 Hotline, and I had a couple questions that people asked. Number one, somebody asked me, what is your favorite name for the new Ferrari rear wing? And I think right now the options officially are the Macarena, that came from Fred Vasseur. Then we have Lewis Hamilton calling it the flip-flop wing. I've also seen people online calling it the rotisserie. I like the rotisserie. I think it should just be the chicken wing. The chicken, like I like that, because it's spinning, right? The rotisserie, it's the chicken on the rotisserie. So I think that's my favorite nickname, but I will call it the Macarena because I feel like that's what's in the canon right now. Number two, somebody asked me, what is HPP? I saw Andrea Stella and somebody else say this, but I have no idea what they're talking about. When Andrea Stella says HPP, he's referring to Mercedes as their manufacturer, because McLaren are a customer team of Mercedes, and HPP refers to Mercedes-Benz high performance powertrains. That's where that comes from. Did you see all the F1 teams interacting with the fan clubs in China? I did. I saw Lewis Hamilton going to that Team LH art gallery, which is pretty cool. I saw Nico Rosberg on Twitter, like, replying back to somebody who had tagged him, saying that there were his fans in Shanghai celebrating his championship like 10 years later. Love. I saw the George Russell fans giving a lot of gifts and really showing out loud and proud. I saw a lot of Franco Colapinto fans giving him a lot of like gifts. I saw him, he got like a plushie of Punch the Monkey. So he's thriving because he's trying to get Alpine to take him to see Punch in Japan. He's not real. Anyway, that's a joke. I mean, Franco Colapinto is so unserious that sometimes he's not a real boy. What else? Another question. Somebody asked me, what's my favorite random thing to see at a race? Like in person, or random thing to see at a race? Like the post. Oh, my favorite random thing. Okay, I'm gonna read. My favorite random thing to see at a race is when the like organizers are testing all the graphics. And I remember the first time I saw it, I think it was in 2023, must have been, and they were testing like a Logan Sargent for like a win graphic, and I was like, what's happening right now? Because that time they didn't do it in succession. Like at some tracks, like I saw videos of them in Shanghai, they did like it flashed like Alex Albon first time winner, and then them doing this, Carlos Sainz first time winner, and they flash in succession, so you understand like there's an exercise for trial and error. They're trying to practice them. It's a drill, right? But then the first time I thought it wasn't a drill, it was like just Logan Sargent, and then like 20 minutes later the next one, and I was like, I was like, what could possibly be happening right now? It didn't click to me. And I was like, Logan Sargent, winner of what? And not in a derogatory way. I was just genuinely like, this graphic is being shown. What should I make of this? It's obvious how I was being dumb, but the first time I thought, I was like, God, of course they have to try the graphics. Of course they have to make sure it works. And I do think about all of the like lost graphics they've made, because they have to make them for everybody. And I'm sure they have like templates of all of the like, the Kimi Antonelli first time race winner. Like they have those for all the drivers. And there's so many that are just sitting there that like don't get used. Like how happy was that F1 content manager editor to finally put Nico Hülkenberg on the podium graphic for last year in Silverstone? Like they must have been over the moon. Okay, I have a Backmarker Bulletin. Basically, I'm good about following the midfield and I'm good about following the front of the field, but I struggle with like knowing what's going on in the Backmarker Bulletin. So I made notes and I tried to pay attention to Aston Martin, Williams, and Cadillac, because that's what I'm counting as backmarkers. Williams just, like last year they were a clear midfield team, and now they're just at the back. Basically, they were kind of just obsessed with being 17th and 18th this weekend. Like in free practice, they were 17th and 18th respectively, and then in sprint qualifying, also both eliminated in SQ1. They were P17 and P18. The sprint, I think Alex started from the pit lane. In lap 1, Carlos went from I think P17 to P14, so not bad on his part. But after a while, there was kind of like not a DRS train, but a train down from P9. Eventually, after Nico Hülkenberg stopped on track and the safety car came out, they split their strategies. And so Carlos stayed out and Alex pit. And after the safety car went back in, Alex was P16 and Carlos was like P11. And in the end, I think Carlos finished P12, but still, splitting the strategies was probably the right call, and leaving him out was probably the right call. Then in qualifying, they qualified P17 and P18 again, and Alex Albon was basically like, we can't just hide behind the fact that our car is overweight, because there are other cars overweight that aren't as bad as we are, so like that's not an acceptable excuse. We need to do better, which, true. For the race, Alex had a mechanical issue and he didn't even start. Carlos Sainz actually had not a bad day. He started P17, but obviously because 4 cars didn't start, he only had 13 cars in front of him, which was good. By the end of lap 1, he was P10. He did quickly get passed by Verstappen, Gasly, and Behrman, and was P13. So it was a bit of an up and down race, but in the end, he finished P9. It probably would have been P10 or maybe even P11. Like towards the end, he was fighting with Franco Colapinto for P10, but then Max Verstappen retired, and then they were P9 and P10, so it was fine. But first points for Williams in 2026, not bad. My only comment for Cadillac is it feels like they won because they finished the race, and like that was the goal. The goal was for them to finish the race, and they did. Although Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas made contact, which is literally the worst thing that could happen. But Checo again accepted responsibility, said he was sorry, and they both finished the race, so it was fine. And they both finished 13th and 15th, even though there were only 15 cars on track. But I wouldn't really say they're anywhere close to points, even though it might seem like they're close to P10. Valtteri Bottas in P13 finished like 40 seconds off of Franco Colapinto in P10. 40 seconds off. And then as for Aston Martin, Lance Stroll's car lost power, and then Fernando Alonso had to retire because the vibrations were so strong. And on the straights, you could see him on his onboard, like leaving his, like letting go of the steering wheel and like shaking his hands off and then putting them back on, which is, again, not something you want to be doing when you're going like a bajillion kph, you know? And after the race, when Lance was asked, whether Honda can like fix things before Japan, he said, "Unless they can find some magic in 10 days, pray for me." He literally said, "Pray for me." Like, I don't think I'm comprehending how bad the situation is. And on top of that, Adrian Newey wasn't in China because the thing with being a technical director as well as a team principal is they have to go back and forth, and it's looking rough for Aston Martin. That's all I can say. Okay, that's all I have for this week, and we will reconvene in between sessions. Like, share, comment, subscribe to me, please, and let me know what your hot takes from the race were.